The blood on her lip had dried, but the swelling around her eye was still fresh as Theresa Carter sat motionless on the weathered porch steps, staring out at the Wyoming sunset of 1878 like it might be her last. The fading light painted the bruises on her face in shades of purple and gold, a cruel mockery of beauty on a face that had once turned heads throughout Willow Creek. Dust clouds rose in the distance, signaling an approaching rider. Theresa didn't move. Running back inside meant facing her husband Frank's rage when he returned from the saloon. Staying outside meant facing whoever was coming down the road. Either way, there was nowhere to hide. The rider approached slowly, his silhouette growing clearer against the amber sky. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive black Stetson that marked him as Yates Montgomery, the new ranch hand who'd signed on at the neighboring Rocking M 3 weeks prior. Theresa had seen him in town once or twice, exchanging polite nods. Nothing more. He reined his dappled gray stallion to a stop at the edge of the yard, his expression changing from casual observation to something harder as he took in her battered face. His jaw tightened visibly. "Evening, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice low and controlled, though his eyes were anything but. They burned with a quiet fury that made Theresa look away. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Frank isn't home." Yates dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to the hitching post. He approached slowly, as one might a wounded animal. When he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he crouched down, bringing himself below her eye level, a deliberate move that made Theresa realize he was trying not to intimidate her. "I didn't come to see Frank," he said, studying her face. "Who did this to you?" Theresa laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain it caused her split lip. "Who do you think, Mr. Montgomery?" Yates's eyes darkened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. "May I?" When she nodded, he gently dabbed at the dried blood on her lip, his touch so careful it nearly broke something inside her. No one had touched her with such gentleness in years. "No one touches you again," he said, his voice quiet but filled with steel. "Not while I draw breath." "You don't understand," Theresa whispered. "He's my husband." "That gives him no right," Yates replied, tucking the handkerchief away. "No man has the right to harm what he's sworn to protect." The sound of horses approaching made them both turn. Frank Carter's voice carried on the evening air, loud and slurred from whiskey. "You should go," Theresa said urgently. Yates stood but made no move to leave. "I'm not afraid of Frank Carter." "You should be," she insisted. "He's killed men for less than finding them talking to me." The cowboy's expression didn't change. "I reckon he and I need to have words, then." "Please," she begged. "He'll be worse if he finds you here." A conflict played across Yates's face, but finally, he nodded. "I'll go. But this isn't over, Mrs. Carter." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "I meant what I said. No one touches you again." Before she could respond, he wheeled his horse around and rode off in the opposite direction from Frank's approaching wagon. Theresa quickly retreated into the house, her mind spinning with the cowboy's words. She had long ago stopped believing in promises. Her father had promised to always protect her. Frank had promised to love and cherish her. Both promises had crumbled to dust. Why would this stranger's promise be any different? Yet as she hurried to prepare Frank's dinner, hoping to avoid his wrath, Yates Montgomery's words echoed in her mind. "No one touches you again." Frank stumbled through the door minutes later, reeking of whiskey and tobacco. His bloodshot eyes narrowed when he saw her face. "Still ugly as sin, I see," he slurred, tossing his hat onto the table. "Dinner's almost ready," Theresa said quietly, keeping her eyes lowered. Frank grunted, dropping heavily into his chair. Sawdust kicking up from the direction of the house. "Someone been here?" Theresa's heart stuttered. "Just Mabel Wilson returning a baking dish," she lied, naming their nearest neighbor, a widow who lived 2 miles east. Frank seemed to accept this, too drunk to question further. Hurry up with that food. I'm starving. As she served him, Theresa's mind wandered to the tall cowboy with the gentle hands and fierce promise. It was foolish to hope, she knew. Hope was a luxury she'd abandoned long ago. Yet something about Yates Montgomery had planted a dangerous seed in her heart, one she feared would only bring more pain when it inevitably withered. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Frank had left at first light, heading to the north pasture to check on a sick calf. Theresa moved stiffly around the kitchen, her ribs aching from where his boot had found them after he'd accused her of overcooking his steak. A knock at the door startled her. No one ever visited this early. Her heart raced as she smoothed her apron and tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Sheriff Thomas Wilkes stood on her porch, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Carter." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, keeping the door partially closed. "What brings you out this way?" "Got a complaint about Frank from the saloon last night. Broke a chair and threatened Davy Miller with a knife." The sheriff's eyes lingered on her bruised face. "Thought I'd come talk to him." "He's not here," Theresa said. "He's checking on the cattle." Sheriff Wilkes nodded slowly. "That's quite a shiner you've got there, Mrs. Carter." "I fell," she replied automatically. "Tripped over the rug." The sheriff's expression said he didn't believe her, but like everyone else in Willow Creek, he wouldn't challenge the lie. "Well, tell Frank I'm looking for him. He owes Peterson for the broken chair and an apology to Miller." "I'll tell him," Theresa promised. As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused. "Had an interesting conversation with Yates Montgomery this morning. He's quite concerned about furniture in these parts. Says some pieces might need relocating before they get damaged beyond repair." Theresa's breath caught. "Is that so?" "Just thought you should know." Sheriff Wilkes settled his hat back on his head. "Good day, Mrs. Carter." After he left, Theresa closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. Yates had spoken to the sheriff? About her? The thought sent equal measures of fear and something dangerously, like hope, through her veins. She spent the morning doing laundry, hanging sheets on the line behind the house, her thoughts repeatedly returning to the cowboy's promise. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, and she retreated to the relative coolness of the house to prepare a cold lunch. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Frank wasn't due back until evening. Peering through the window, her heart leaped when she recognized the dappled gray stallion and its rider. Yates dismounted, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking chestnut mare with a white blaze. He tied both horses to the hitching post and approached the house, carrying a small bundle. Theresa met him on the porch, keeping her voice low, though she knew Frank was miles away. "Mr. Montgomery, you shouldn't be here." "Call me Yates, please," he said, his hazel eyes earnest. "I brought you something." He held out the bundle, a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. "What is this?" she asked, not reaching for it. "Medicine for your face. My mother's recipe," he explained. "And some provisions." "Provisions?" Yates glanced at the chestnut mare. "That's Penny. She's gentle as they come and has good stamina." Understanding dawned. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to have the choice," he corrected. "No one should live in fear, Mrs. Carter." "Theresa," she said softly, then added more firmly, "and you don't understand what you're asking. Frank would hunt me down. He'd kill me." "Not if you go far enough," Yates argued. "I have a sister in Colorado. She'd take you in until you get settled." Theresa shook her head. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Yates's expression softened. "I know enough. I know no one deserves what he's doing to you." He placed the basket on the porch railing. "The offer stands. Penny's yours whether you use her today or next month." "I can't accept." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will. The mare needs a good home, and I reckon you might need her more than you know." A cloud of dust on the horizon made them both turn. Someone was coming. You need to go, Theresa urged. This time, Yates didn't argue. Think about it, he said, backing toward his horse. You deserve better than this, Theresa. He mounted and rode away, leaving the chestnut mare tied to the post. Theresa quickly grabbed the basket and hurried inside, her heart pounding. When she pulled back the checkered cloth, she found jars of salve, dried herbs, bandages, and beneath them all, a small leather pouch that clinked when she lifted it. Inside were gold coins enough to start a new life somewhere. Tears filled her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return. Even longer since she'd felt anything like hope. The approaching rider turned out to be young Timothy from the general store, delivering a package Frank had ordered. Theresa explained the mare as a purchase Frank had made, and Timothy, never one to question his elders, simply nodded and left. That night, when Frank returned, he didn't notice the mare in the corral. He was too focused on Theresa's partially healed face, remarking that she looked less like a raccoon now. She served his dinner with shaking hands, the weight of possibility heavy in her heart. For 3 days, Theresa contemplated Yates's offer. For 3 nights, she endured Frank's volatile temper, his harsh words, and twice his fists. Each morning, she would look at Penny grazing in the corral, and the decision would seem both impossible and inevitable. On the 4th day, Frank announced he would be traveling to Cheyenne for a cattle auction. He'd be gone at least 5 days. Don't get any ideas while I'm gone, he warned as he packed his saddlebags. Reverend Mills will be checking in on you. And you know what'll happen if I come back and find anything amiss. Theresa nodded, keeping her eyes downcast. Yes, Frank. After he left, she moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects, opening drawers, running her fingers over the worn quilt her mother had made for her wedding. Could she really leave it all behind? Could she find the courage? The answer came later that afternoon when Reverend Mills arrived, ostensibly to check on her welfare as Frank had requested. My dear, the Reverend said, his eyes traveling over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Frank asked me to ensure you have everything you need in his absence. I'm fine, Reverend, Theresa replied, keeping the door partially closed. Thank you for your concern. The Reverend pushed the door wider. I insist on coming in. Frank would expect proper hospitality. Reluctantly, Theresa allowed him entry. As she turned to offer him coffee, his hand gripped her arm. Frank mentioned you've been disobedient lately, the Reverend said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Perhaps you need spiritual guidance. No, thank you, Theresa said firmly, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. Frank and I have an understanding, Mrs. Carter. He turns a blind eye to certain indiscretions on my part, and I provide him with business opportunities through my congregation. Please let go of me, Theresa said, her voice stronger than she felt. The Reverend's other hand moved to her waist. Don't pretend you don't know the arrangement. Frank made it quite clear. The sound of the door crashing open made them both jump. Yates Montgomery stood in the doorway, his face like thunder. Take your hands off her, he said, his voice deadly quiet. The Reverend released Theresa immediately, smoothing his coat. This is a private residence, Mr. Montgomery. You have no right. Get out, Yates interrupted, stepping aside from the doorway. Before I forget you're a man of the cloth. For a moment, it seemed the Reverend might argue, but something in Yates's expression changed his mind. He hurried past the cowboy, muttering about, reporting this to Frank. When he was gone, Theresa collapsed into a chair, trembling. How did you know? I didn't, Yates admitted, still standing by the door. I came to tell you I'm leaving. God offered a job driving cattle to Montana. His eyes softened. Wanted to make sure you were all right before I left. Frank's gone to Cheyenne, Theresa said, her voice hollow. 5 days, he said. Yates nodded slowly. Perfect timing for someone looking to make a fresh start. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Theresa made her decision. I need an hour to pack. Relief washed over Yates's face. I'll saddle Penny. 90 minutes later, Theresa Carter rode away from the only home she'd known for 8 years, a small bundle of possessions tied behind her saddle, and Yates Montgomery riding beside her. They kept to little-used trails, avoiding the main roads where they might be recognized. We'll head south first, Yates explained as they rode. Throw off anyone who might come looking. Then cut west toward Colorado. You're coming with me? Theresa asked, surprised. Just until you're safely with my sister, he clarified. Then I'll head to Montana, as planned. Theresa nodded, a strange mixture of relief and disappointment flooding her chest. Of course, he wasn't abandoning his life for her. That would be absurd. They barely knew each other. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a sheltered grove near a small creek. Yates efficiently built a fire, while Theresa arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. How's your face feeling? He asked as they ate a simple meal of jerky and biscuits. Theresa touched her cheek self-consciously. Better. Your mother's salve helped. She was a healer of sorts, Yates said, his expression softening with memory. New remedies for just about everything. She passed 5 years ago. Influenza. I'm sorry, Theresa said sincerely. Your father? Lost him in the war. Confederate side, Yates added with a wry smile. Though he wasn't much for the cause. Just a Texan who got drafted. And your sister? The one in Colorado? Tabitha. She's married to a shopkeeper in Silverton. Good man, from what I've seen. They have 2 little ones. Yates poked at the fire. They'll welcome you. I already sent a letter. You were that certain I'd come? He looked up, firelight dancing in his hazel eyes. Hopeful, not certain. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the chirping of crickets the only sounds in the gathering darkness. Frank wasn't always cruel, Theresa said suddenly, needing to explain. When we first married, he was charming, attentive. My father had just died, and the ranch was failing. Frank seemed like salvation. Yates listened quietly, his expression neutral. The first time he hit me was a year after our wedding, she continued. He apologized for days afterward. Brought me wildflowers. Promised it would never happen again. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. It's not your fault, Yates said gently. Isn't it? I stayed. Year after year, I stayed. Surviving isn't something to be ashamed of, Theresa. His use of her given name sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. What about you? She asked, eager to change the subject. No wife waiting somewhere? No, he replied simply. Never found the right woman. Or maybe I did, but the timing was wrong. Something in his tone made her look up, but his eyes were focused on the flames, his expression unreadable. They slept under the stars that night, Theresa waking frequently, startled by unfamiliar sounds and the strange sensation of freedom. Each time she opened her eyes, she found Yates awake, keeping watch, his silent presence more comforting than she wanted to admit. Dawn broke clear and cool. They ate a quick breakfast and continued their journey, staying off the main trails. Yates was a quiet traveling companion, but not uncomfortably so. He pointed out interesting plants and wildlife, told her stories of his time working cattle drives, and seemed genuinely interested when she shared memories of her childhood on her father's ranch. By midday, they had covered significant ground. Stopping to rest the horses near a stream, Theresa found herself studying Yates as he knelt to fill their canteens. The sunlight caught in his dark blonde hair, highlighting strands of gold. His hands were strong and capable, yet she knew firsthand how gentle they could be. Why did you really help me? She asked suddenly. The truth. Yates straightened, considering her question. I saw something in you that reminded me of my mother, he finally said. After my father died, She married a man who seemed kind at first. Turned out he wasn't. His jaw tightened. I was too young to help her then. I'm not too young now. I'm sorry, Theresa said softly. Don't be. She eventually found her courage and left him. Started over in a new town. He handed her a filled canteen. That's why I knew you could do it too. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through Theresa. She withdrew her hand quickly, confused by her reaction. They continued riding through the afternoon, making good progress. Yates estimated they'd reach his sister's home in Silverton in 4 more days if they maintained their pace. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Storm coming, Yates observed. We need to find better shelter than trees tonight. An hour later, they came upon an abandoned line shack, a small, crude cabin likely built by cowboys working the range. The roof was intact, and though dusty and home to spiders, it would keep them dry. It's not the Grand Hotel, but it'll do, Yates said, brushing cobwebs from the single window. Theresa said about sweeping the dirt floor with a branch while Yates tended to the horses, securing them in the lean-to attached to the cabin. By the time he returned, she had cleared enough space for their bedrolls and started a small fire in the stone fireplace. You're handy to have around, he commented, setting down their saddlebags. 8 years of keeping house teaches you a thing or two, she replied with a small smile. The storm hit just as they finished a simple dinner. Rain lashed against the single window, and thunder boomed overhead, making the little cabin shake. Theresa jumped at a particularly loud crack of thunder. Not fond of storms? Yates asked, noticing her reaction. They always made Frank agitated, she admitted. He'd drink more when it stormed. Yates's expression darkened. Frank's not here. No, she agreed, wrapping her arms around herself. He's not. Another crash of thunder made her flinch. Without thinking, Yates moved to sit beside her, offering silent support. Tell me about Montana, she said, clearly wanting distraction. Why go there? Wide open spaces, he replied. Good grazing land. A man can still stake a claim, build something of his own. Is that what you want? Your own ranch? Yates nodded. Been saving for it for years. The cattle drive pays well enough that I might have enough to buy a small spread by fall. You'd be alone? At first, he acknowledged. Eventually, I'd hope to have a family. A wife who'd want that life. Theresa stared into the fire. It sounds peaceful. It would be hard work, he cautioned. Ranching always is. But yes, peaceful in its own way. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a different kind of warmth had begun to grow. They talked long into the night, sharing dreams and memories, carefully avoiding the uncertain future that awaited them both. When Theresa finally lay down to sleep, her bedroll much closer to Yates's than it had been the previous night, she found herself wondering what it might be like to be the wife of a man like him, a man whose strength didn't manifest in violence, whose words didn't cut like knives. Such thoughts were dangerous, she knew. She was still legally married to Frank. Even if she weren't, a woman with her history would be a burden to any man, especially one with dreams as clean and hopeful as Yates Montgomery's. Morning came with clearing skies and mud that sucked at the horses' hooves as they continued their journey. The rain had washed away their tracks, which Yates said was a blessing. Frank might already have returned from Cheyenne and discovered her gone. He'll come looking, Theresa said as they rode. Let him, Yates replied, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. We've got a good lead, and we're not on any trail he'd expect. Around midday, they reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post, a stable, and a few scattered cabins. Yates suggested they stop to resupply and gather information. Stay with the horses, he told Theresa. Keep your hat low. The fewer people who see your face, the better. Theresa nodded, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat she'd borrowed from him. With her hair tucked up and wearing a spare shirt of his over her dress, she could pass for a young man from a distance. Yates returned 15 minutes later with supplies and a grim expression. "What is it?" she asked as they rode away from the settlement. Words already spread. "Frank returned early from Cheyenne. He's offering a reward for information about you and a separate bounty on my head." Fear clutched at Theresa's heart. "How much?" "Enough to tempt men who don't ask questions," Yates said grimly. "We need to move faster." They pushed harder that day, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. By nightfall, they had crossed into Colorado territory, but Yates insisted they continue riding by moonlight for several more hours. When they finally made camp, it was in a well-hidden ravine that offered protection from both the elements and searching eyes. Exhausted, Theresa slumped against a rock while Yates cared for the horses. "We should reach Silverton in 2 days if we keep this pace," he said, joining her with jerky and hardtack for their dinner. Theresa nodded numbly, too tired to respond. The reality of their situation was sinking in. Frank would never stop looking for her. She had embarrassed him by leaving, and Frank Carter did not tolerate embarrassment. "You're thinking too hard," Yates observed, passing her a canteen. "I've put you in danger," she said, meeting his eyes. "If Frank finds us, he'll kill you first." "I'm not easy to kill," Yates replied with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't a joke," Theresa snapped. "You should leave me at the next town. I can make my way to your sister's alone." Yates's expression hardened. "Is that what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want. I won't have your death on my conscience." "Then it's settled," he said, his voice firm. "Because I won't have abandoning you on mine." Theresa opened her mouth to argue further, but the look in his eyes silenced her. There's something beyond duty or chivalry that made her heart beat faster. "Why?" she whispered. Yates looked away, focusing on the small fire. "Because in the 3 weeks I've known you exist, you've shown more courage than most men I've ridden with for years. Because you deserve someone in your corner for once." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I can't stop thinking about you, even when I know I should." The admission hung in the air between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it further. Eventually, Theresa simply said, "Thank you," and they lapsed into silence. That night, their bedrolls ended up side by side, close enough that Theresa could feel the warmth radiating from Yates's body. She told herself it was for safety, for warmth. But when his hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with a gentle pressure that asked nothing but offered everything, she knew it was much more than that. The next day dawned with a new tension between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. They packed camp efficiently, working together with a synchronicity that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. As they rode, Theresa found herself watching Yates more openly, noting the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he handled the reins, the strong line of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes when he caught her looking and smiled. For his part, Yates seemed more protective than ever, constantly scanning their surroundings, insisting they avoid all settlements and take the most secluded routes possible. "The bounty will have brought out trackers," he explained when Theresa questioned why they were taking such a difficult mountain path. "Men who can read sign better than most." "Like you?" she asked. He smiled. "I learned from Comanches as a boy in Texas. Not many white men have that training." "You're full of surprises, Yates Montgomery." "So are you, Theresa Carter." His use of her married name reminded them both of the reality they temporarily escaped in each other's company. They made camp early that evening in a defensible position. Yates selected a small plateau backed by sheer cliffs with a clear view of the approach. After caring for the horses, he spent time gathering extra firewood and setting up their camp with more attention to detail than usual. "Expecting company?" Theresa asked, noting his preparation of multiple sight lines. "Just being cautious," he replied, but his hand kept straying to his revolver. As darkness fell, Yates insisted on taking the first watch, positioning himself where he could observe the trail below while remaining hidden. Theresa tried to sleep but found herself too anxious. Eventually, she rose and joined him at his lookout. "You should rest," he said without turning as she settled beside him. "So should you," she countered. "You've barely slept in days." He glanced at her then, the moonlight catching in his eyes. "I'll sleep when you're safe." The simple declaration made her throat tighten with emotion. "Yates," the sound of distant hoofbeats silenced her immediately. Yates tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "How many?" Theresa whispered. "3, maybe 4, he replied, straining to hear. "Could be travelers. Could be looking for us." They waited in tense silence as the riders drew closer. When they came into view on the trail below, Yates's grip on his weapon tightened. "Bounty hunters," he said grimly, recognizing the type if not the specific men. "They're following our trail." Theresa's heart raced. "What do we do?" "We have the high ground and cover of darkness," Yates replied, his voice steady. "If they continue past, we let them go. If they start up this way—" He left the implication hanging. The riders stopped directly below their position. Theresa and Yates remained absolutely still as voices drifted up to them. "Trail ends here," one man said. "They either doubled back or went up. Carter's paying extra if we bring the woman back unharmed," another replied. "The cowboy, though he just wants proof he's dead." Yates's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Too dark to track further tonight," the first man decided. "We'll camp here and pick up at first light." As the men dismounted and began setting up camp, Yates turned to Theresa. "We need to move," he whispered.
"Now."
While they're distracted. They crept back to their own camp, quickly and silently packing their belongings. Yates led the horses down the backside of the plateau, a steeper but hidden route that bypassed the bounty hunter's position. For hours they walked, leading the horses through difficult terrain, stopping only when they reached a fast-flowing river. "We'll cross here," Yates decided. "Water will hide our scent and tracks." The river was cold and swift, reaching the horses' bellies at its deepest point. Theresa clung to Penny's mane as the mare navigated the current. Halfway across, her foot slipped from the stirrup, and she nearly lost her balance. Yates was immediately beside her, his strong hand steadying her back. "I've got you," he said, his voice barely audible over the rushing water. Once across, they continued riding through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared on the treacherous mountain trails. By dawn, they had put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers, but both humans and animals were exhausted. "We need to rest," Theresa insisted, noticing how Yates swayed slightly in his saddle. He reluctantly agreed, finding a small cave formed by an overhanging rock. After ensuring the horses were secure and hidden, he finally allowed himself to sit, his back against the stone wall. "Sleep," Theresa urged, sitting beside him. "I'll keep watch." "Wake me in 2 hours," he mumbled, already half asleep. "Of course," she lied, having no intention of waking him until he'd gotten proper rest. As he slept, Theresa watched over him, studying his face in repose. The constant vigilance had fallen away, leaving him looking younger, more vulnerable. Without thinking, she reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. His hand caught her wrist, his eyes flying open instantly. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." Instead of releasing her, Yates brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. The gesture, so unexpected and tender, made Theresa's breath catch. "How long was I asleep?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Not long enough," she replied truthfully. He sat up straighter, still holding her hand. "Theresa," the distant sound of a gunshot interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both froze, listening intently. Another shot followed, then a third. "That's not aimed at us," Yates said, frowning. Sounds like they're shooting at game. Or each other, Theresa suggested hopefully. Yates smiled despite the tension. We should move. Even if they're delayed, they know the general direction we're heading. They continued their journey, now following game trails so narrow they had to ride single file. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains. By late afternoon, they reached a pass that Yates said would lead them down toward Silverton. We'll be there by tomorrow evening, he promised as they paused to rest the horses. My sister's house is on the outskirts of town. You'll be safe there while you decide what to do next. The thought of reaching safety should have brought Theresa relief. Instead, she felt a growing sense of loss. Once they reached Silverton, Yates would continue to Montana, and she would.
What?
Start a new life alone? The prospect suddenly seemed bleaker than she had imagined. What will you tell your sister about me? She asked as they began the descent down the other side of the pass. The truth, Yates replied simply. That you needed help and I was in a position to give it. Will you tell her about Frank? Only what you want me to. He glanced at her. Your story is yours to tell, Theresa. His consideration, so different from Frank's controlling nature, touched her deeply. Thank you. They made camp that night in a small meadow, hidden from the trail by a grove of aspens. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. After a meager dinner, they sat close together for warmth, neither quite ready to sleep despite their exhaustion. Will you write? Theresa asked suddenly. From Montana? Yates looked surprised by the question. Would you want me to? Yes, she admitted. I would. He studied her face in the firelight. Theresa, when we reach Silverton, I don't have to leave right away. Hope fluttered in her chest. What about your cattle drive? It doesn't start for another 3 weeks, he explained. I could stay, help you get settled. I'd like that, she said softly. Yates reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and for a moment, Theresa thought he might kiss her. Instead, he dropped his hand, a conflict playing across his face. You're still married, he said, as if reminding himself more than her. On paper, she agreed. In my heart, that marriage ended years ago. Yates nodded slowly. Still, there are proprieties. My sister would insist on them, even understanding the circumstances. Of course, Theresa replied, trying to hide her disappointment. I wouldn't want to compromise your family's reputation. It's not that, Yates said quickly. It's just I want to do right by you, Theresa. In all ways. The implication of his words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before she could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Yates was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Who's there? He called, positioning himself between Theresa and the sound. Silence answered him. Then another snap, closer this time. Show yourself, Yates demanded. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young man, barely more than a boy, with his hands raised. Don't shoot, mister. I'm just passing through. Yates didn't lower his weapon. Kind of late to be passing through, isn't it? Got separated from my pa and brothers, the boy explained nervously. Saw your fire. Was hoping you might let me warm up before I keep looking. Something about the boy's story didn't ring true to Theresa. She stood slowly, moving closer to Yates. Where were you headed? She asked. Silverton, the boy replied. Pa's looking to set up a store there. Yates and Theresa exchanged glances. Your name, son? Yates asked.
Tommy.
Tommy Wilson. Yates lowered his gun slightly. Come closer to the fire, Tommy. Slowly. As the boy stepped into the firelight, Theresa noticed his clothes too fine for a simple traveler, with a distinctive silver belt buckle that looked familiar. With a jolt, she remembered where she'd seen it before on one of Frank's ranch hands, a man named Wilson who had 2 sons. Yates, she whispered urgently. He's one of Frank's men. Before Yates could react, A shot rang out from the darkness. Yates shoved Theresa to the ground, shielding her with his body as bullets splintered the tree behind them. The boy Tommy used the distraction to draw his own weapon, but Yates was faster. His shot caught Tommy in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. "Stay down," Yates ordered Theresa, returning fire into the darkness. More shots came from at least 2 different positions. They were surrounded. "Theresa Carter," a voice called out. "Your husband wants you home. Come out now, and nobody else needs to get hurt." Theresa recognized the voice. Silas Jenkins, Frank's foreman, a man almost as cruel as Frank himself. "Go to hell, Jenkins," Yates shouted back, firing again. A bullet hit the log beside Theresa, showering her with bark. Yates pulled her deeper into cover behind a fallen tree. "We're pinned down," he said grimly. "There's at least 3 of them, maybe more." "What do we do?" Theresa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Yates checked his ammunition. "When I give the signal, run for the horses. Head down the trail toward Silverton. Don't stop for anything." "Not without you," she insisted. "I'll be right behind you," he promised, though something in his eyes told her he wasn't certain he could keep that promise. Before she could argue further, Yates raised his voice. "Jenkins, let the woman go, and I'll surrender. This is between men." A harsh laugh answered him. "Carter wants you both. The woman alive, you. Not so much." While Jenkins was talking, Yates whispered to Theresa, "On my mark, run to your left, stay low, get to Penny. I'll cover you." Theresa nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Yates suddenly stood, firing rapidly in the direction of Jenkins's voice. "Now," he shouted. Theresa ran, crouching low, as bullets whizzed overhead. She reached Penny and frantically untied the reins, swinging into the saddle. Turning, she saw Yates backing toward his own horse, still firing to keep their attackers at bay. He had almost reached his horse when a shot rang out from a new direction. Yates stumbled, clutching his side. "Yates!" Theresa screamed. Despite his wound, he managed to mount his horse. "Ride," he ordered, his voice strained with pain. They galloped away from the camp, bullets following them until they were out of range. Theresa kept glancing back at Yates, horrified to see the growing darkness on his shirt. "Keep going," he urged, his voice weaker now. "Don't stop." They rode hard for nearly an hour before Yates began to sway dangerously in his saddle. Theresa pulled up beside him, reaching out to steady him. "We need to stop," she insisted. "You're losing too much blood." "Can't stop," he muttered. "They'll be following." "You'll die if we don't," she said firmly. "I'm not losing you, Yates Montgomery." The declaration seemed to penetrate his pain-induced haze. He nodded weakly, allowing her to guide them off the trail to a sheltered area beside a small stream. Helping him dismount was difficult. He was much larger than her, and growing weaker by the minute. Once she got him settled against a tree, she quickly assessed his wound. The bullet had entered his right side and, thankfully, appeared to have exited cleanly. But he had lost a concerning amount of blood, and the wound needed cleaning and bandaging. Using water from the stream and strips torn from her petticoat, Theresa cleaned the wound as gently as she could. Yates remained conscious, but gritted his teeth against the pain. "Good thing my mother taught me about herbs," he managed, trying for humor despite his condition. "Might need some of that salve now." "Save your strength," Theresa ordered, though she was grateful he was lucid enough to joke. After bandaging the wound as best she could, she helped him drink some water, then sat beside him, her hand finding his. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said. "Silverton." "Not far now," he replied, his breathing labored. "Few more hours' ride." "You can't ride in this condition." "Have to," he insisted. "Jenkins won't give up." Theresa knew he was right. Frank's men would be tracking them, and they couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. But Yates was in no condition to travel. As if reading her thoughts, he squeezed her hand. "I've had worse." "Liar," she replied, but with fondness. "Maybe a little," he admitted with a weak smile. "But I'm not dying before I get you safely to Tabitha's. That's a promise." Theresa studied his pale face, the determination in his eyes despite the pain. In that moment, she realized what had been growing in her heart since he first found her on that porch with a black eye love. She loved this man who had risked everything to save her, who had shown her kindness when she'd forgotten what kindness felt like. Acting on impulse, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. For a moment, he seemed too surprised to respond. Then his free hand came up to cup the back of her head, deepening the kiss with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Yates's eyes were wide with wonder. "What was that for?" he asked hoarsely. "For being the kind of man I never thought existed," she replied simply. "And because if something happens to either of us before we reach Silverton, I didn't want to regret not doing that at least once." His expression softened. "Nothing's going to happen to us. I won't allow it." They rested for another hour, during which Theresa kept watch while Yates drifted in and out of consciousness. His color was poor, and the bandage had soaked through with blood, but they had no choice but to continue. Getting him back on his horse was a struggle that left them both gasping. Once mounted, Yates swayed alarmingly, and Theresa made a quick decision. Using the rope from their packs, she secured him to his saddle, then tied his horse's reins to Penny's saddle. "I'll lead both horses," she explained. "You focus on staying upright." Yates nodded weakly, lacking the strength to argue. They proceeded slowly, Theresa constantly checking on Yates's condition while scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit. By mid-morning, the trail began to descend more steeply, and in the distance, she could make out a valley with scattered buildings Silverton. Relief flooded her, only to be tempered by the realization that Yates had gone silent. Glancing back, she saw his head lolling forward, his eyes closed. "Yates," she called sharply. "Stay with me." He stirred slightly, but didn't respond. Panic rising, Theresa urged the horses to move faster, heedless now of the noise they made or the trail they left. All that mattered was getting Yates to help before it was too late. As they approached the outskirts of town, Theresa frantically tried to recall Yates's directions to his sister's house. "Near the edge of town," he had said, "with a blue door." The first house she passed had a red door, the second green, the third blue. Heart racing, she guided the horses into the yard and called out desperately, "Help! Please! I need help!" The door flew open, and a woman who could only be Yates's sister emerged, the same hazel eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. Behind her stood a tall man with spectacles, presumably her husband. "Yates!" the woman cried, rushing forward as she took in her brother's condition. "Robert, get the doctor."
"Now."
The man didn't hesitate, running toward town without even stopping for a hat. "I'm Tabitha," the woman said to Theresa as they worked together to get Yates down from his horse. "You must be Theresa." "Yes," Theresa confirmed, surprised. "He told you about me?" "His letter arrived yesterday," Tabitha explained as they half-carried, half-dragged Yates into the house. "Said he was bringing a friend who needed sanctuary." They maneuvered Yates onto a bed in a small, neat room. Tabitha quickly cut away his bloodied shirt to examine the wound. "Bullet?" she asked grimly. Theresa nodded. "Last night, Frank's men found us." Understanding dawned in Tabitha's eyes. "You're the one running from your husband." "Yes," Theresa admitted, watching anxiously as Tabitha cleaned the wound with practiced movements. "Your brother saved my life." "Looks like you returned the favor," Tabitha observed, nodding to Theresa's makeshift bandaging. This field dressing probably kept him from bleeding out. Before Theresa could respond, the door burst open, and Robert returned with an elderly man carrying a medical bag. Everyone out, the doctor ordered after a cursory examination. Except you, Mrs. Thompson. I'll need your assistance. Tabitha nodded, ushering Theresa and Robert from the room. In the small parlor, Theresa sank onto a chair, the events of the past days catching up to her all at once. Her hands were shaking, and she realized they were still covered in Yates's blood. Here, Robert said kindly, offering her a basin of warm water and a cloth. Clean up while I make some coffee. You look like you could use it. Theresa thanked him numbly, scrubbing the blood from her hands with mechanical movements. Her mind was entirely focused on the closed bedroom door, behind which Yates's life hung in the balance. Robert returned with coffee and a plate of biscuits, neither of which Theresa could bring herself to touch. He didn't press her, simply sitting nearby, offering silent support. After what seemed like an eternity, the bedroom door opened, and Tabitha emerged, her apron spotted with blood but her expression relieved. He'll live, she announced. The bullet missed anything vital, thank God. He's lost a lot of blood, but the doctor says with rest and care, he should make a full recovery. The relief that flooded Theresa was so intense, she felt lightheaded. Can I see him? He's sleeping now, Tabitha said. Doctor gave him laudanum for the pain. But yes, you can look in on him. Theresa approached the bed where Yates lay, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. His face was pale against the white pillowcase, but the pained tension had eased from his features. Gently, she took his hand in hers, marveling at how natural it felt despite their short acquaintance. Thank you, she whispered, too softly for anyone else to hear. For everything. Behind her, Tabitha cleared her throat. You should rest too. I've prepared the guest room for you. Reluctantly, Theresa released Yates's hand and followed Tabitha to a small but comfortable room across the hall. Thank you for taking us in, Theresa said. Especially under these circumstances. Tabitha studied her thoughtfully. My brother doesn't risk his life for just anyone, Mrs. Carter. If he thought you were worth it, that's good enough for me. She paused, then added more gently. Get some sleep. We'll talk more when you've rested. Left alone, Theresa sank onto the bed, exhaustion claiming her almost instantly. Her last conscious thought was of Yates's gentle hands, his fierce protection, and the way his lips had felt against hers. She woke hours later to the sound of children's laughter. Disoriented, she sat up, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the past days came rushing back: the escape, the pursuit, Yates's injury. Yates. Was he all right? She rose quickly, smoothing her rumpled clothes as best she could, and crossed the hall to his room. The door was ajar, and she could hear voices inside Yates's, though weaker than usual, and Tabitha's. Knocking softly, she pushed the door open. Yates was propped up on pillows, pale but alert. His face brightened visibly when he saw her. There she is, he said, his voice raspy but warm. My rescuing angel. Tabitha rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Already trying to charm her, I see. You must be feeling better. She stood, patting Theresa's arm as she passed. I'll leave you two alone. Try not to let him talk too much, he needs rest. When she had gone, Theresa moved to Yates's bedside, taking the chair Tabitha had vacated. How are you feeling? Like I've been shot, he replied with a weak attempt at humor. But better than I expected to. Doctor says I was lucky. We both were, Theresa said softly. Yates reached for her hand, his grip firmer than she had expected. Tabitha says you got me here just in time. That you probably saved my life. You saved mine first, she reminded him. Several times over. His expression grew serious. About what happened before we reached town. You don't have to say anything, Theresa interrupted, suddenly afraid he might regret their kiss. Yes, I do, he insisted. I need you to know that wasn't just because I thought I might be dying. What I feel for you, it's real, Theresa. more real than anything I felt before. Her heart swelled. I feel it too. But you're still married, he said, the same conflict she'd seen before clouding his eyes. And I won't ask you to. Frank will never let me go, she interrupted, the harsh reality intruding on their moment. Not willingly. He'll keep hunting me as long as he lives. Yates's jaw tightened. Then we'll find another way. There are laws grounds for divorce in cases like yours. It would take years, Theresa said. And I'd have to go before a judge, prove his cruelty. His standing in the community would make it nearly impossible. Then we'll wait, Yates said simply. However long it takes. The sincerity in his voice made Theresa's eyes sting with tears. You'd wait? What about Montana? Montana will still be there, he replied. And I'd rather build a life with you than a ranch without you. Before she could respond to this declaration, a commotion from outside drew their attention. Voices raised in alarm, then the distinctive sound of horses approaching at speed. Tabitha appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Riders coming. 5 of them. Robert says they look like trouble. Fear clutched at Theresa's heart. Frank's men. They've found us. Yates struggled to sit up further, wincing in pain. My gun. You're in no condition to fight, Tabitha said firmly. Robert's gone for the sheriff, but he might not get back in time. Get Theresa out the back, Yates ordered his sister. Take her to the miller's place up the canyon. I'm not leaving you, Theresa insisted. You have to, Yates argued. If Frank gets his hands on you again. The sound of heavy boots on the front porch interrupted him. A moment later, a loud knock rattled the door. Mrs. Thompson. A voice called out Jenkins's voice. We know you're harboring fugitives. Send them out, and there won't be any trouble. Tabitha set her jaw in a way that reminded Theresa forcefully of Yates. Stay here, she ordered, leaving the room. They heard the front door open, then Tabitha's voice, cool and controlled. This is my home, sir. You have no right to barge in making accusations. We have every right, Jenkins replied. We're pursuing a kidnapped woman and the man who took her. Kidnapped. Tabitha's voice dripped with skepticism. I think not. And I'll thank you to leave my property until you return with the sheriff and proper authorization. We don't need authorization. Another voice joined in Frank's voice, sending a chill down Theresa's spine. That's my wife in there, and I'm taking her home. Yates's hand tightened around Theresa's. The back window, he whispered. While they're distracted, Theresa shook her head. You can barely sit up, let alone escape through a window. Then you go, he insisted. Please, Theresa. I can't bear the thought of you back with him. The sound of arguing continued from the front of the house, growing more heated. Then the unmistakable sound of the door being forced open, followed by Tabitha's outraged cry and Robert's voice joining the fray. It's too late, Theresa said, a strange calm settling over her. But I'm not going back with him, Yates. Not alive. Horror crossed Yates's face. Don't talk like that. I won't let him hurt me again, she said with quiet determination. Or you. The bedroom door burst open. Frank Carter stood there, his face twisted with rage, flanked by Jenkins and another of his men. Behind them, Robert was being restrained by a 4th man, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. There you are, wife, Frank said, his cold eyes fixed on Theresa. Time to come home. Theresa stood, placing herself between Frank and the bed where Yates lay. I'm not your wife anymore, Frank. Not in any way that matters. Frank's eyes narrowed. You're mine until death do us part. Remember those vows? Or were you too busy breaking them with this cowboy? He jerked his chin toward Yates. The only one who broke vows was you, Theresa replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The first time you raised your hand to me. Frank took a menacing step forward. You always did talk too much. Touch her, and it's the last thing you'll do, Yates warned from the bed, his voice weak, but filled with conviction. Frank laughed. "You're not exactly in a position to make threats, Cowboy." He turned to Jenkins. "Get her. We're leaving." Jenkins moved toward Theresa, but she backed away, her hand finding the letter opener on the bedside table. "Stay back." Jenkins hesitated, looking to Frank for instruction. "Oh, for God's sake," Frank snarled, drawing his gun. "Put down that letter opener, Theresa, or I'll put a bullet in your lover right now." Theresa's heart froze as Frank aimed at Yates. Slowly, she lowered the letter opener. "That's better," Frank said. "Now come here." "Frank Carter." A new voice called from the hallway. "Drop that weapon." Sheriff Micah Reynolds stood in the doorway, his own gun drawn, flanked by 2 deputies. Behind them, Tabitha looked on with fierce satisfaction. "This is a family matter, Sheriff," Frank said without lowering his gun. "I'm retrieving my wayward wife." "Looks more like breaking and entering, assault, and threatening murder to me," the sheriff replied evenly. "Now drop the gun before my men drop you." For a tense moment, it seemed Frank might refuse. Then, with a curse, he lowered his weapon. "Thank you," the sheriff said, nodding to one of his deputies to take Frank's gun. "Now, would someone like to explain what's happening here?" Before Frank could speak, Tabitha stepped forward. "These men forced their way into my home, Sheriff. Assaulted my husband and threatened my injured brother and his friend." "She's my wife," Frank insisted. "She ran off with this man." "I have every right." "No man has the right to beat his wife," Yates interrupted, his voice stronger now. "Or to hunt her down like an animal when she escapes his cruelty." The sheriff's gaze moved to Theresa. "Madam? Is that true? Did your husband abuse you?" Theresa stood straight, meeting the sheriff's eyes directly. "For years, Sheriff. This last time he gave me this." She gestured to her face, where the fading bruises were still visible. "Mr. Montgomery helped me escape. He saved my life." Sheriff Reynolds studied her thoughtfully, then turned to Frank. "Mr. Carter, I'm placing you under arrest for breaking and entering, assault, and menacing with a deadly weapon." "You can't be serious," Frank sputtered. "She's my property." "No woman is property, Carter," the sheriff replied coldly. "Not in my jurisdiction." He nodded to his deputies. "Take him and his men to the jail. We'll sort this out properly." As the deputies led Frank and his men away, the sheriff turned back to Theresa. "Madam, I won't lie to you. The law still favors husbands in these matters. But Judge Wilson's daughter left an abusive husband last year. He might be sympathetic to your situation." "Thank you, Sheriff," Theresa said, her voice thick with emotion. After the sheriff left, Tabitha helped Robert clean the cut on his head while Theresa returned to Yates's bedside. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Yates took her hand. "Not entirely, but it's a start." The next few weeks passed in a blur of healing and legal proceedings. Yates recovered steadily, moving from bed to chair to short walks around the house under Tabitha's watchful eye. Theresa, meanwhile, found herself wrapped in the unexpected warmth of the Thompson family, Tabitha's fierce protectiveness, Robert's quiet kindness, and their children's unquestioning acceptance. Frank remained in jail, his attempts to secure release complicated by the multiple charges against him and, as it turned out, by outstanding warrants from 2 other territories for various swindles and frauds. Judge Wilson proved sympathetic to Theresa's situation, especially after examining the evidence of Frank's cruelty and criminal activities. He granted a preliminary separation that would allow Theresa to live apart from Frank legally, while divorce proceedings moved forward, a process that would take time, but now seemed possible. As for Yates, his cattle drive to Montana had departed without him. He showed no regret, instead focusing his energy on regaining his strength and helping Theresa navigate her new legal status. On a warm evening 6 weeks after their arrival in Silverton, Theresa and Yates sat on the porch of the Thompson home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, her head leaning against him in a closeness that felt both new and somehow ancient. "I received a telegram today," Yates said, breaking their comfortable silence. "From a friend in Montana." Theresa looked up, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. "About the cattle drive?" "No," he replied, smiling.
About land.
"There's a small ranch for sale near Helena. Good water rights, decent grazing. My friend says it's perfect for someone looking to start fresh." "Montana," Theresa repeated, her voice neutral. "That's still your plan, then?" Yates turned to face her fully. "It could be our plan, if you wanted it to be." Her heart quickened. "Yates, I'm still not free. The divorce could take a year or more." "I know," he acknowledged. "And I'd never ask you to compromise your reputation or principles. But I also know I love you, Theresa. I think I've loved you since I saw you sitting on that porch with a black eye, too brave to run, too strong to break." Tears filled Theresa's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "But we could build a life while we wait," he suggested. "As friends, partners, whatever you're comfortable with. The land is there. The future is there. When you're legally free, if you still want me then, if," she interrupted, incredulous. "There's no if about it. Yates Montgomery. I will always want you." His smile was like sunrise breaking. "Then say yes.
Come to Montana with me.
Let me build you a home with a porch where you can sit and never fear again." Theresa thought of the woman she had been just months ago, trapped, hopeless, expecting to die under Frank's fists. And now here she was, loved, respected, with a future opening before her like an endless prairie. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to Montana. Yes to waiting. Yes to everything." Yates's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, the promise of a life where bruises came only from honest work, where harsh words were never spoken in anger, where love grew strong and true under the vast Montana sky. 2 years later, Theresa stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Yates rode in from checking the north pasture. Their small herd had grown, as had their holdings, a testament to hard work and careful management. The gold band on her finger caught the sunlight as she waved to him. It was new, just 3 weeks old, placed there the day after her divorce from Frank Carter was finalized. Frank himself remained in prison, his various crimes having caught up with him at last. Yates dismounted and climbed the porch steps, his smile as warm as the day they'd met. "How's my wife today?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Happier than she ever thought possible," Theresa replied truthfully. His hand gently cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the spot where a bruise had once marred her skin. "No one touches you except with love," he said softly. "That's a promise I intend to keep forever." Theresa leaned into his touch, marveling at how a journey that began with fear and pain had led her to such perfect joy. "I know," she whispered. "I've never doubted it. Not since the day a cowboy found me on a porch with a black eye and promised no one would hurt me again." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of fulfillment and future, of promises made and kept, of a love that had begun in the darkest of circumstances, but now flourished in the light.